as Daniel Schmachtenberger wrote in a beautiful little post, how do I know that what I believe is true? Most people, and I'm not exempt from this, choose their data points in order that they fit existing beliefs, in order that they confirm that I've been right all along, in order that they reinforce a familiar worldview and a familiar self-image. Anything that doesn't fit that is an attack. It's an attack on my identity. So it actually takes a bit of courage and humility to entertain narratives that contradict what you had believed in the past. And it's a shock. And people go into denial when it happens. Maybe there's a lot of denial going on right now, but denial is a phase. It's part of a larger process. Eventually, the denial is harder and harder to maintain, and you enter the next phase, ultimately accepting that you don't know. And that is similar to the acceptance of death, actually. It's the same fear of the unknown, fear of transcending who you are right now. And that fear, the fear of death, has governed our society increasingly for a long time, which is inevitable from the story of self that prevails in our society, a separate self in a world of other. If that's what you accept being to be, then death is the worst possible outcome. It's the annihilation of all that is, all yourself, the universe of self.
This section is on building a self system, a self that is autonomous, sovereign, and able to make sense of the world at large, and able to make sense of your immediate environment, so that you are able to make decisions on what to do. It is also a massive cognitive shift and way of seeing oneself that is completely different. And there are many, many technologies that have come to light that can facilitate this process of what we'll call awakening or enlightenment. It's kind of a process of going from one self system or one level of complexity to the next level of complexity. And there's a liminal phase where you let go of your current self identity and start building a new one. And the liminal phase can be very unsettling. So we're looking at ways of facilitating this process and birthing a new identity. This section is going to be on self-development. That's developing a self, developing yourself in a way that you can thrive through this period that humanity is going through. I will just point towards various techniques. Some of them are age-old, the sort of process of enlightenment. And some are new, like neuro hacks, in order to hack your way out of your current reality and start developing a new self-identity, an identity that is connected to and hooked up to the systems that are going to take us through this next time. So this section is on self-development and downloading the new integrated software that can take on the world that is.
The secret being, the world doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, it's like we're all engaged in this very elaborate pretense, and we all kind of know that it's a game. It's not, we're just playing it. We're characters, but that's not who we are.
Yeah, it's a very, for some people, a very deeply buried knowledge and a lonely knowledge. And that's why it's so gratifying when you hear something or read something that speaks what you've been whispering to yourself for a long time?
I think the key to the self-development aspect of this is that we can nowadays, with the tools and technologies that we have, of reprogramming yourself and building a new self-identity. But it is not so easy to do this in isolation. It is best to build a self-identity through group work, because this new identity is so interrelated and needs to be nested in another whole hierarchy of other community agreements and commitments. It's kind of a group consensus that one gets to, where you as the agent interact with the arena, and then the arena, the people, give you feedback as to who it is that your new you is. So this is most often best done in group work, or in something similar to what a cult or a religion is, where you decide as a group to go through an initiation process and letting go of your old self, that had all its tendrils connected into old ways of seeing and old agreements with people, and to then reestablish a new set of agreements and a new sets of networks and tendrils that hold you to a new set of agreements that can be established through this group work. So self-development is not necessarily done best in isolation.
There has been, for all of creation, a cat and mouse game between the priests and the Prometheans, right? And there's always the people trying to bring light to humanity. And there's always the forces of dark looking to control it or shut it down. It has ever been thus, right? From ancient Greece through MK Ultra, right? And CIA projects. And even, we said, hey, our worst enemies are weaponization, commercialization, and hedonization, right? Our own worst impulses. So it can either be taken over by state or non-state actors, or it can be co-opted to sell us more shit.
So furthermore to the self-development process, I'm going to just use the integral model of wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, just as a way of defining areas of development, of self-development. Also recognizing that it has to be done in group form. But I'm going to run through the process of wake up, which is getting a bit of a shock. And I think we're all in this process at the moment, so we're all busy waking up. It's a bit of a recontextualization of one's personal life, but also a recontextualization of the world and what the world is made up. It's a shift in reality. And this can also be done temporarily through a state changing. So a wake-up process can also be done through psychedelics or other psychopharmacologies. But it's basically breaking frame and realizing there's a much bigger picture going on. So that is in the wake-up section. Then we'll follow on to a grow-up section. And this is actually... Growing up is a bit of a long process, and it takes many years, but it's basically developing and building this new identity. And building a new identity is interrelated with so many other things that you've got to do work in the world to grow yourself, to grow your perspectives by taking multiple perspectives of others, grow yourself in your identity, who it is that you think that you are. And all the frameworks for seeing the world and interacting with the world in your brain, all the neurological links have to be built in structures. So as a wake-up is a state change and can happen very suddenly through an altered state, a grow-up stage is building the structures, and it takes a much longer period of time, but it supports the higher states of consciousness. So we're going to explore the various ways in which we can grow up too. And then we're going to have another process called cleanup. And cleanup is basically shadow work. It's what drives us in our subconscious quite often. A lot of wounding of our past and a lot of things that we really don't want to see about ourselves. And it's vital in the process of breaking yourself down before you build yourself up, you've got to know what are the driving factors that lie quite often in the subconscious and in the realm of shadow. So that is cleanup. And then we are also going to enter another phase of development, which is show up. And this is bringing yourself and your true self and bringing what it is that you know, your various knowingnesses, to other people, bringing them to the world, and helping others also go through the processes of waking up, growing up, and cleaning up. And you are here called to action so that you can do your work in the world and be infused with meaning and purpose. And one often finds this in religions as well. You know, we'll look at building an ethical cult, but the process of showing up is becoming a mentor and helping other people go through the process as well, as you have recently gone through. It's like a teaching process.
For people who are on the ladder of quote-unquote awakening, or just reorganizing or claiming the sovereignty of their own decision-making and interpretation of the world. Because what is awakening? Awakening, I think, is this signpost catch-all term that a lot of people, it's like God. A lot of people can project all kinds of things into and just wave it off. But awakening it's all there is. What else is there but to climb the ladder of conscious realization and integration of more and more sense data, and being present with it and seeing it as it is and creating our own world through our perceptions. I just don't see anything more noble than that, because it's only through that we can act rightfully into the world, that we can imprint ourselves into the world in a way that truly matters and that helps this whole ecosystem of consciousness grow.
The process of waking up can be very varied, going anything from waking up from sleeping to waking up on a mass scale to the nature of the universe, and waking up to the ever-present non-dual self. So there's a massive spectrum in between, and every time we realize something we didn't know before, we wake up to that. So the small increments of waking up, not realizing how the system worked or how we hide things from ourselves as our shadow, waking up to our shadow selves. There are all sorts of ways of waking up, and it's also a synonym for enlightenment. As you enlighten the dark areas of yourself, of your world and understanding, you enlighten and grow lighter and grow up towards a more open and expansive sense of self. I'm adding in John Vervaeke's work as a very important aspect to all of this development. He has done a series called Awakening to the Meaning Crisis, and this is a small excerpt from it called Plato's Cave.
It's called The Parable or the Myth of the Cave. And it's a way of talking about this, the relationship between these things. Notice two things here. You need to remember this. Notice how much self-transformation and getting more in contact with the world are interconnected. This is participatory knowing. I'm not over here as an impartial passive observer, just forming true beliefs about this. I have to change myself in order to see the world. And then the world changes, and then that puts a demand on me to change myself. And as I change myself, the world discloses itself in a new way, and so on and so forth. This is participatory knowing. I'm not just changing my mind. This is not just knowing with my mind. This is knowing with the very machinery of myself. Now, what's Plato's myth? So here's the surface, right? There's a pathway going down, right? And that leads into this inner cavern, right? There's a fire here, right? There's people chained into chairs, so all they can do is look at the back of the cave. Then there's other people walking in front of the fire, and it's casting shadows onto the cave because of the firelight, and they're hearing the echoes. And what Plato says is, people take the shadows and the echoes to be the real things because they're chained, they're caught up. But what happens is an individual gets free. And what does that individual do? That individual turns and sees the fire. And that allows them to realize that the shadows and the echoes aren't the real things. They're shadows and echoes. And what happens is the person's ability to notice the real patterns as opposed to the merely correlational patterns is changed. Remember we talked about that? People start to see, they start to realize, oh, these are what real patterns feel like, as opposed to what I thought was real. You get the taste for reality developing. And that taste means they start to look around and explore, and then they realize there's a path, there's light coming through it. And then they start a journey upward. Now, notice how this journey works. When they take a step forward, they're blinded by the light. And they have to wait. They have to wait for their eyes to adjust. The self has to be transformed. And then once the eyes have adjusted, they can see how to go. And then they take another step. And then they're blinded again. And there's this slow process. And Plato keeps talking about, at various stages they have to stop because they're blinded. And then they adjust. And then they gain the ability to see where they couldn't see before. It's this participatory transformation I talked about. And eventually they come up here. And they look around. Right? And what are they looking for? They want to see the source of the real light, the light that's making them, allowing them to pick up on the real patterns. Where is this light that shows the reality of things coming from? And not only is it showing the reality of things, this light is the source of the life of things. Where's this source of understanding and light? And if they look around, and of course they glimpse, because they can't stare at it directly, the sun. And it's overwhelming, it's beyond their comprehension. But they see it, and it fills them with a kind of awe. And of course, what they do is they go back down into the tunnel rapidly, right? And they get here and they try to tell their fellow prisoners what they saw, but of course they're stumbling around because their eyes don't work anymore in that darkness. And they're saying things that don't make absolutely no sense to these people. And so they ridicule them, and if they could, they would kill that individual. And of course, this is an allusion to Socrates. Now, first of all, notice that, contrary to what people think, enlightenment is not just an Eastern idea. This is a myth of enlightenment, of coming into the light. It's a myth of self-transcendence and self-transformation. It's a myth of coming, and I mean myth in the sense that we've been talking about. It's a parable of coming into greater and greater contact with reality. You see, notice the story is, right, you pick up on real patterns, that challenges you, it sort of blinds you, and then you transform to pick them up, and then you're enabled to move forward, then you confront those real patterns again, and you're doing that cycle that I talked about. There's a Greek word for this, ascent, called anagoge. This is the anagogic or the anagogical aspect of Plato's idea. Notice what he's doing. He's taking the movement between the illusory world and the real world, and he's turning it into this account of how you can make your lives rationally more meaningful. You can become more fully alive and more at peace in conjunction, in concert with you coming more and more in contact with the real patterns that make sense of reality. You can satisfy in a mutually supporting fashion your desire, your meta drive for inner peace, and your meta drive to be in contact with reality. This is what Plato calls wisdom, a fullness of being. We become more and more real ourselves as we become more and more at peace, so that we can more and more realize the real patterns. We conform ourselves more and more to reality. And you may say, this is kind of a crazy story. Is it? Is it? Because here's a story from 1999. There's all these people, and they're trapped in a world of shadows and unreality. It's called the Matrix. And they need to wake up and be welcomed to the real world. And the character that's in there is Neo, from Neoplatonism, the new man. People flock to that movie. And all it is this, with some great martial arts and some interesting science fiction special effects. This parable, this is what I mean about a myth. This isn't a story from the past, right? The reason why you go to the Matrix and people still watch it and talk about it is because it's a myth. It sings to you, it speaks to you now, because it talks about perennial problems that you face, problems of the psyche being in conflict with each other, the problem of being caught up in illusion, out of touch with reality, and it presents the possibility of liberation and self-transcendence and a fullness, an enhanced meaning in life. It's a myth of wisdom that is perennially relevant, because it's not about the past, it's about what's happening in you right here, right now. Self-transformation and getting more in contact with the world are interconnected. This is participatory knowing. I'm not over here as an impartial passive observer, just forming true beliefs about this. I have to change myself in order to see the world. And then the world changes, and then that puts a demand on me to change myself. And as I change myself, the world discloses itself in a new way, and so on and so forth. This is participatory knowing. I'm not just changing my mind. This is not just knowing with my mind. This is knowing with the very machinery of myself. Now, what's Plato?
Hi guys, I'm just putting together a short little clip basically on neurohacking, introducing the new technologies that have just come out, and also the various people that are speaking about it. I find this very, very exciting, so can't wait to hear your feedback.
Do we get to tweak and upgrade subjectivity? Because that's what you're talking about, right?
Tweaking and upgrading subjectivity, yeah, I would say, and add a multi-perspectival in front of that subjectivity, and I think you're off to the races.
And so how do we do it? Flow Dojo.
This has to do with what's possible as a human being that we can do with our own mind, whether it's yogic practice or whether it's exploring entheogens and psychedelics in a sacred context, or whether it's meditative practices or ways that we can use our breath in particular ways to open up transformative states. Whatever the technology, there are ways in which we can transform our experience. And that's really where I focus. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy, as you pointed out, as you know, there, at the top there was self-actualization, but then sometimes towards the end of Maslow's life, he actually said self-transcendence. And so what I'm really interested in are what are the practices and the methods that we know from ancient history and that are emerging now today that can actually give us a sense of self-transcendence at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. So if in fact we have the other needs met, then what? Then what do we do? what does self-transcendence look like for an individual? Then, in groups of people collectively around the world, what happens when self-transcendence begins to happen in group form? And what is the new potential that emerges when groups of people have all moved through a sense of self-transcendence? I think then we start to get in some very interesting territory, particularly when we combine it with some of these other technologies, whether it's neuroscientific technologies, neurohacker technology supplements, or brain-mind interface. There's some really interesting things that happen when self-transcendence meets modern technology, meets groups of people internationally on a world-centric or cosmocentric level of development. I think we're getting really close to that, and there are groups that are exploring it as we speak.
What new forms of human beauty and human subjectivity will become possible as we create a new generation of mind-melding technologies, that we can use to make well people better? That it's not just about fixing an affliction, but it's about expanding what it means to be and perceive and be human.
Waking up can be something that can be trained and stabilized as a permanent attribute of one's experience. So self-transcendence doesn't have to be just a peak, but can be something that becomes a persistent experience over time as a view or an experience of reality. So I want to emphasize that we're not just talking about one-off hits, but there's a trainable capacity of stabilization that's possible for every single human being. And that's what we mean by waking up, not just a state experience, but a continued, ongoing experience of waking up.
Baseline consciousness, our normal operating system, our prism of perception is kind of like wearing cognitive ankle weights, right? It's a way of keeping us grounded and functioning with some kind of normalcy in the world. It's an adaptation. It's a form of repression of our full potential. And we're entering an age where recent advances in psychology, technology, neurobiology, and pharmacology, the four forces of ecstasy, are allowing us to peel underneath, to glimpse underneath the hood of our brain and mind, to get a sense of what's going on and be able to perhaps modify and optimize the knobs and levers of perception to disclose new forms of being. This emerging field of advances, of pharmacological interventions in the evanescent flux of sensation and perception that Eric Davis says is all we have and all we are, is known as neurohacking. Holds tremendous promise, and we should dive headfirst into this field of inquiry because the future of the species is at stake.
The only solution that we think is possible is to open source the tools for self-realization, community connection, and healing ahead of all the efforts to co-opt it for darker ends and be a bunch of, this is the Rebel Alliance. Like, that's the only hope we have, is if we can publish the plans for the Death Star, right? And the tools for our own liberations.
Courage. What you have to do is you have to train yourself. You have to cultivate your character by engaging in practices that will slowly, over time, create a virtual engine. Because you are a self-organizing process. You are the source of your actions that modify the environment that then feeds back into you and changes you. And then you produce your actions, and then the environment feeds back and changes you. Here's the question I ask you. Are you just letting that run? Or are you trying to rationally and reflectively cultivate your character, structure a virtual engine so that that self-organizing process is growing and developing in an optimal fashion? Aristotle takes the question, and we use this, we even use, and I'm not saying we use it trivially, but we don't get the depth of what we're saying. One of the most trenchant criticisms we can make of ourselves, of other people, is this. Listen to my language. Listen to it. He's not living up to his potential. Part of what makes your life meaningful is that you have cultivated character that allows you to actualize your potential. You've created a virtual engine that regulates your development in a way in which you grow up. It's a constantly in which self-organization has been regulated and shaped into self-improvement so that your potential is fully realized. So Aristotle brings in this notion then of development and growth as part of what it means to have a meaningful life. He brings in a new aspect to the notion of wisdom. Wisdom is gaining the ability to cultivate virtues, to create your virtual engine, a set of virtues that basically is regulating your growth and development so that you actualize your potential.
In this section on the ecology of practices, I would like to try and build a website or build a group that is keen on pulling together all the tools and technologies that are available for self-transcendence, for developing a new self-identity, for growing up and awakening to these various processes of waking up. So I'm wanting to pull it into one area so that we can get groups able to access for free all the tools and technologies. That's where Jamie Wheal said what we need to do is open source the tools of self-liberation ahead of the plans for the Death Star. So this is about building a community and a website to pull tools of transcendence together.
Create internal wayfinding tools within their own bodies and minds to move toward the future self that they want to become. And what they've done is created a powerful tool set for managing the commons of any social group and learning how to do it better. So there's both rigorous and robust science about this and really good design principles. So Elinor Ostrom named 8 of these design principles. One of them, just to get a sense of it, is a commons can be managed well if there's a strong sense of shared identity and shared purpose for the people managing it. If you don't have that, you're not going to manage it very well. And a second one is you need to have fair and rapid conflict resolution. If you don't have a way of fairly quickly resolving a conflict, then you're not going to manage the commons very well. Just go on, and she named 8 of these. And the magic is how they work together. They actually become a complex adaptive governance system, which is pretty impressive.
So putting together the self-development chapter, it's basically being able to build a new sense of self, a new identity that is able to take on and help build the new structures that are needed. So it's a redevelopment of the interior of the individual, who then makes an effect on our environment, and then the environment in turn takes effect on us. So we build bit by bit a new social structure from the individual outward.
One of the areas where I think we've made tremendous progress in it, for fascinating historical reasons people don't recognize, is how much has been learned about how to manage an economy, about how to form effective social groups, about how to cooperate with people and negotiate and resolve conflicts, and a whole host of other things that are more in the kind of sociology and humanities domain, but that are extremely important in all of this. Like, for example, there's a really rich body of knowledge spanning across anthropology and evolutionary studies that seeks to understand the functional adaptations of religions. Now, it doesn't mean we need to necessarily create a new religion, although I have reasons to suspect we might need to create new religions, but leaving that aside for a moment, just coming to understand what happens when you have rituals that include synchronous movement that help people to have more familial trust among each other and feel more generous toward each other. Turns out that kind of pro-social expression of humanity is a really important thing to know how it works. And so, in addition to all of the technological advances in the what is normally construed as technology space, we have a huge number of technological advances in the realm of human knowledge about being human and working among humans. And so when we start to put those together, we actually have the ability to design our way into a regenerative Earth system, meaning the human management is in partnership with the biosphere of the Earth at all relevant scales. And people call me somewhat of an eloquent articulator of is just how much of this knowledge exists. As we start to dig into any of the pieces and see how solid the foundations are, they're pretty damn solid. So we have a lot to work with.
This chapter on ethical cult building or architecting a conscious culture is more intended to be a small groups of people who are very passionate about self-transcendence, who are very passionate about seeing themselves differently in this emerging world. As leaders are partaking in creating a more beautiful world. It's for these people that this ethical cult building or architecting a conscious culture is for. And it's for us to be the best examples of human beings that other people would look towards and go, wow, what are you guys doing? Because whatever you're doing, it really works. The way that you are, the way that you manage people, the way that you manage crises, the way that you handle things is something that we would like to have as well. And really, that is the pioneering work, is to create these little bands. I wouldn't say tribes, because as tribes often refers to us and them, but more like little bands of groups of conscious people doing great work in the world.
Of how do we architect conscious culture? Because what's happening right now is a collapse in meaning for the centrists. The Pew Research Foundation found 2 years ago that the nuns, the none of the aboves, I don't identify with any organized religion, are not only the fastest growing, but are now for the first time ever the largest group in the United States. And it plays through with Canada and the Western Europe as well. What's happening as that organized establishment religion, meaning-making, community, belonging, code of ethics, all those things is collapsing, is we're seeing a squishing to the extremes. We're seeing a rise in fundamentalism and a rise in nihilism. Right? That's the anxiety, depression, suicide, despair. The people are like, where did all the meaning go? This feels really pointless. So we're in a pickle. Now the Sam Harrises, the Christopher Hitchens, the four horsemen of the new atheism, right? We're sort of tap dancing on the grave of old school, superstitious, hierarchical, tops down, opiate of the masses religion. And justly so. But there's babies and there's bathwater. Because what anthropologists have learned, and sociologists today even, is that religion serves mimetically, forget the dogma, forget what you believe, just that you believe. And that you're a part of a community of belief leads people to be healthier, wealthier, and happier than if you don't. You're like, huh, that's interesting. So mimetically it's propagated, it serves a purpose. What on earth might that purpose be? So we kind of did some research on what are the core building blocks. And what we found were these three things. These are the nutrients that belonging to a community of belief offered. Specifically, ecstasis, the ability to access peak states that felt more important, more real, more uplifting and valorizing than our day-to-day grinds. On the backs of that comes catharsis, deep and profound healing. Right? Life beats us down. Up until very recently, it was nasty, brutish, and short. So to have a place to mend our bones, a place to lick our wounds, and a place to remember a little bit of what we forgot has been essential. And the final bit is we're social tribal primates. We do this together. And when we have those peak experiences and the profound healing together, an invariable product is communitas, what Victor Turner at the University of Chicago uses as the term to describe a deeply bonded core group experience. And interestingly, Keith Sawyer at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, has done research on what he calls group flow, consider it sort of synonymous with communitas, and he's described it as 3 times more rewarding than being in those states by yourself. So powerful, and by the way, also weaponizable. If you look at a MAGA rally, it is pulling all the levers on this. If you look at jihadi recruitment, if you look at alt-right recruitment, right, you can come in through any of these doors. You can come in through the peak experience and be like, holy shit, and I still got work to do, and I found my brothers and sisters. Or you can find your brothers and sisters, say, I'm not a misfit toy anymore. That experience alone sends me to the ceiling of yeehaw, peak experience, and then we have our wounds to mend. Right? We can come in different points on that triangle, but that is sort of the engine of organized transformational culture.
So this section in community building, we're going to use the work from Ken Wilber and Dustin DePerno, who wrote a paper called Developmental Civilization. So if you take the concept of we are developing through these layers, then if you have a civilization or a society that recognizes these further stages of adult development, as we called it sometimes in the wisdom tradition, it's developing wisdom to the point of this massive awakening, enlightenment. So we're trying to look at how to, in a way, institute it, so that we actually have a supported process of further adult development to these wiser stages that are able to manage the planet and social interaction at a higher level, at the level of complexity of a living organism.
Well, it's that question. You used the word efficiency. And, you know, when you're working on a machine, you optimize for efficiency. When you're working with living systems like societies or families or forests, or you cannot optimize for efficiency. You have to optimize for interdependent health. Otherwise, you lose. And so there's a real shift that's possible there, and it might be a side effect of a lot of people, a lot of businesses going bankrupt. Supply chains that could get broken. Things that just cannot reboot because they've lost too much to catch up again.
So community building, I'm going to split into 2 parts. The first part is the social agreements, the sort of the mental, cultural, relational agreements that we make. So this can look more like the example of a religion. And religion has these great community and cohesion psychotechnologies. So we're going to look at religion as an example of how we can get social cohesion going without necessarily needing a false god or some false ideology to look up to, but the same psychotechnologies can be used. And for example, that community can have a set of guidelines that they understand together, and in that community, in that are able to have a shared identity, a shared purpose of building something, of an industry vision, of a way of agreeing together that this is the way of thinking that they're going to adopt. You get a kind of group consensus. When you add that to taking a sacrament, so having an experience of a viewpoint, so getting a higher perspective through the use of a sacrament and getting your visions and then being able to unpack what that means in the group is also very powerful. So we've got scripture, we've got community or sangha, we've got a sacrament that we can take, And then there are other ways of shifting your identity that can be done as a process of psychotechnology. So this is a breaking down how your identity is made up of these different components that you cling to, and how they can be shifted into something else. And you add this together with a gathering of a higher number of people, you add some music and some singing and some vibes, and you start to get the formation of a cult and a religion, which sounds like it has bad connotations, but if you deconstruct how they work, you can actually rebuild them and repurpose the idea and the vehicle of religion.
So here's an example I want to share with you guys of a way to put those maxims into gear. Okay? And I would propose this is my best effort at pathological restraint. Okay? So this is the rules to the great game. This is a pure invitation, right? And if you guys are familiar with the finite game, that notion, finite and infinite games, right, that book, in the infinite game, this is how we might choose to play it. So the game has an infinite number of levels and an infinite number of dimensions. The purpose of the game is to remember you're playing it. The more levels of the game you remember you're playing, the more fun and the more consequential the game becomes. Higher levels of the game punch through into 3D. They are often experienced as synchronicity, coincidence, and farce. That is a known feature and best held loosely. The 3D level is the access point to all the other levels of the game. So until proven otherwise, don't die in 3D. Once you've figured out the game, help turn as many non-player characters into players and as many players into architects as you possibly can. And finally, stay awake and build stuff.
We don't have to play the finite game, right? That's played to win or lose, or that for every winner, there's a loser. For every victory, there have to be losses. Oh no. That we can play the infinite game instead, in which the purpose of the game is to keep the game going. It is a sustainable game.
I'd like to do a little thought experiment, and this is like playing a game. And the thought experiment involves what we would do with human resources if we could. So it seems a little bit far-stretched right now, but perhaps in the near future it won't. Basically, we are in a situation of lockdown, and during lockdown, only the essential services, people that are involved in essential services, are needed. So it'll be very interesting to look to see how many people in terms of human resources are deployed or employed in activity, and how many people are staying at home. In other words, what are the core essential services that we need? Things like farming, things like basic transport networks, communication networks, things that power, sewage, all that kind of stuff that we need in there. And then healthcare. So if you actually take that as the sort of building block, and you say, well, we need those people there, we can even. So what is the percentage of people that are kind of not going to work or not essential? That percentage would be an interesting figure to play around with. And let's say it's something like 50 or 60%. We have an enormous pool then of people also in that 60% of people that are losing their jobs. And in the close future will, people in the restaurant industry or in various service industries where there's not going to be much money around, there's going to be an enormous amount of human capital or human potential that could be used for creating these new structures. So I'm proposing a kind of an old world, new world, people that were all employed in the old world in finance, people that were employed in advertising, people that are in the military. This is an enormous amount of human resources and skills that could be redirected into a new world types, in building a new world type scenario. So that could, if we took the people that were the brains that were in the financial industry and we said, okay, let's take those same people and use them for building new exchange structures. So just like they would do in money, they are building exchange networks, communication and exchange networks, and so working for this new world. We also got a hell of a lot of people in human resources that could in the world of money and finances, and also in all the administration of it, kind of being used in learning centers. So we could see a massive shift of people's activity and what they do during the day, either being involved in building new social structures, so the software and the exchange networks, and then learning centers, places where people are learning new skills on soft skills, on relating and collaboration, building trust and trust networks. So learning how to do that and how to bring that into your community and into your industry, the industries that are dying and the new industries that are being born. You've also got all the people that are in advertising, which we could also shift across to also building and putting people in contact with one another. So the advertising is putting people or selling people's awareness, selling space to have products and services advertised. But that is the same thing as putting people in contact with one another. I've got this good and service and you have this need, or I have this need, so I can fulfill that need. It's putting people into connection. So we could continue doing this in a sort of intelligent classifiers where supply and demands and needs and offerings are met in relationship. And so it's building in that new network in place, replacing the advertising industry. And then of course we've got an enormous amount of people and money involved in military. And the military could be used for more like building infrastructure and building emergency situations where there's sudden change. And so we could use still a hell of a lot of military personnel, military people in the area of building new systems, and that's just taking about 40-50% of people who have an enormous set of skills applied not to making money and the system of profit and business and creating sort of unsustainable products, but actually in building a more cohesive, integrated, interbeing ecosystem of human life. As well as building communities based on agreements and relationships, we also need to build community structures, ones where community structures like a decision-making process, which we can bring online and get involved in lots of different areas of making lots of small decisions that collectively make big decisions, a sort of a collective intelligence, but also building the systems that can do that, the software systems and the systems, the psychotechnologies, the systems of thinking that can piece this information together and make proper sense of what to do next. So we're also looking at systems of keeping record, keeping accounts, and the best one that I've found to date is the community exchange system, which is both like a classifieds for offering one's goods and services, as well as a place to find whatever it is that you need, but underpinning it is an account system, a ledger of the transaction that happened. So there isn't money in the actual system. It is basically keeping a scoreboard and keeping a tally of what you have taken and what you have given. So it gives a kind of, it levels the playing field and allows a reciprocation of give and take. And so this is so far a system that I have become aware of that is something that is very small at the moment, but can be upscaled on a massive level and start to serve as part of an ecology of alternative ways of doing money. It doesn't have to be the only one, but it can be one of many ways of doing money. I'll show you a brief clip of the community exchange system. Have you ever wondered why our lives have become so focused on money? Businesses focus on making money more than the services they provide. And because of this misdirection, it is no wonder that our behavior is unsustainable. There are plenty of people willing to work, and there's plenty of work that needs to get done, but there's often not enough money to make it happen. In the technological age we are in today, how can we let money get in the way of serving one another? I spent many years researching the alternatives, and there are many ideas out there. I came across the Community Exchange System, or CES. It is an existing platform that allows for the transition away from being just money-focused. CES started in 2003 and has grown to an existing membership of 39,000 members and is the largest moneyless exchange system in the world. There are already 1,000 communities in 100 countries using CES system.
It doesn't matter, whatever needs to be done. If someone has a want, and I see a want that I can do, then I offer it. I have put henna for a bride. I've done items from my house. I've cooked, I've baked, I've made jewelry. I've done babysitting.
Every time, because I'm in a wheelchair, every time I step outside my house, I need help. And I was using my friends, and it got to a point where I didn't want to ring my friends because I knew that the minute they hear my voice, they're going to say, what does Dawn want now? Now I can ring my friends because they're my friends, and I pay other people in talents to help me with the things that I need.
There's clearly a huge need and desire for this. However, because of its relatively outdated technology and manual inputs, it's not keeping up with today's connectivity trends, and therefore its ability to extend these opportunities to those who really need it. Our project's attempt is to revolutionize the community exchange system. Firstly, creating an interface that makes the user experience super easy and integrated with other social media platforms. This will allow it to expand exponentially into today's dynamic, media-savvy world, thereby vastly expanding its usefulness and user base. Most importantly, we wish to popularize CES to everyone and get the message out there that you don't have to be restricted by a lack of money. We can do this through film and social media campaigns, as well as a special film about the effects that this technology is having on people's lives. So part of collective intelligence and part of intelligence is not all artificial intelligence, it's just intelligence in general. And if we bring the intelligence to the level of the individual, where an individual can make informed choices about how their actions affect the whole, then we're bringing intelligence down to the level of the individual, informed by the whole. And so that is just intelligence in general. It doesn't have to be artificial or collective intelligence. So that's how AI is built into our collective intelligence, rather than being this separate thing, this runaway thing that's separate from us. An area to look out for. It's something that we need to take a deep interest in. It is a technology that could have a massive impact on humanity. It's like a genie that's out the bottle. It's out already, and currently AI is being developed in the hands of either military type intelligence, so weaponization, or commercialization, Facebook, Google are using it to analyze people, human behavior, and manipulate it. So currently the emergence of AI is still brand new, but the rolling impacts that it will have are absolutely massive. So it is important that we wield this genie, this superpower, in a way that benefits everybody before it sets off in a direction almost impossible to stop. So AI is a very important area, as I suggested, to have a digital self, so each individual has access to this super intelligence. I wouldn't call it artificial intelligence, I'll just call it vastly enhanced intelligence, that this intelligence is then harnessed for the individual to be able to see the world, make sense of the world, and to sovereignly and independently make decisions that influence their world in repercussions. So how they have repercussions on their close family and community, to their organizations, and then how those organizations impact the world and world systems. So that intelligence can be brought down to the level of the individual, where the individual is then not so susceptible because they're well aware of their own selves and their own actions, is not so easily influenced as they currently are. So I'm just going to briefly explain what AI could look like for the individual. So currently artificial intelligence is used either by the military, or alternatively it is used for Facebook or Google and these kind of guys to kind of predict and manipulate public opinion. But if AI is actually used on an individual level, what does that look like? And so just to picture that, if I had a kind of like a Siri on steroids, or another version of myself, a digital self that is able to collate information so that I can view what is important, it serves as a way of extracting the signal from all the noise. Like a type of a filter system, or otherwise it could be seen as a membrane. So if you can imagine, we've got like a physical body, we have an emotional body, we've got a mental body, and then to collate that mental body with other mental bodies and with a coordination is to then have a digital body, an interactive digital body, that acts as this intelligent membrane, allowing you to make decisions from information that you've decided that is important to you. And that would be an evolving intelligent membrane that you are constantly in relationship shaping it. So it's not shaped for you, you are the shaper of it. You're the holder of the information that is the data that you get about yourself and the data that you get about the world. So your digital self is a way of making sense. So you are connected to other people that you trust and make sense of how they make sense of the world. So you're kind of farming out that intelligence to other organizations that you learn to trust. And then also mining all the data on yourself, your activity, your movements, where you place your attention. So when you're on the computer, what are you doing with that time? When you're moving around, what are you doing? How much time do you spend at home? How much time do you spend at work? How much time do you spend on the computer in entertainment or working or communicating? We can collate that information to see how we're best spending our time, and actually make much more, get a reflection on who it is that we are in action, and then actually move on that on the dashboard of information that we get about ourselves. So this is the concept of a digital self. It is just a layer of organization. Use it, don't use it. You know, it's not an imperative, but it's there running in the background. If you need to ever look at yourself or or decide how you're best spending your time and your money. You can also see and get a map of what people are doing, what industries are doing, what things are moving, where you are needed. So actually informing you as to how you can be of use to the whole, as well as expressing your needs and having them met by other people. This is the concept of a digital self. So what AI for the individual could actually look like would be like you have developed another body, another level of integration and complexity of yourself. That is like going from an ego self to having a well-informed self or an intelligent self, an intelligent membrane that lets in the right information, the signal, and can hold out the noise so that you can make informed choices as to what you're going to do with your time, with your consciousness, and what you're going to do with your money. At the moment it's money, and you then can make informed choices through AI as to how do you collectively co-create as a coordinated actions result in big results.